Hello, Nixa voters. My name is Drew Douglas. I'm the Director of Communications for the City of Nixa. Today we're going to be talking about another episode of Nixa Live. We're going to be answering your questions and talking all about the 3 proposed updates to Nixa's Home Rule Charter. So if you want to learn more about that or you have questions about that, please stay tuned and we'll be talking all about that today. Whether you're watching live or watching this recorded, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being an informed voter. That's really important for how democracy works at the local level. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about how democracy works at the local level and how we might kind of make some tweaks to that even here in Nixa. And I'm here with Mark Hartsock. He is a longtime Nixa resident. He's a business owner here in downtown Nixa, and he's very involved with, a lot of people know him through his volunteer time with a lot of local charities. And he volunteered a lot of hours on the city's Home Rule Charter Review Commission as the chair of that commission. He's a resident of District 3 here in Nixa, which is the southern part of our community. And Mark, tell me a little bit about what the Home Rule Charter for the city is. It's kind of our constitution for local government, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you, Drew. So yes, we are very fortunate that we are a home rule charter city. In Nixa, our home rule charter is a limiting document that basically gives more power to the people of Nixa. And exactly as Drew stated, it is basically the constitution for Nixa. It sets forth limits for how council and our mayor can function, as well as determining the basic functionality of our city.
Yeah, and we became a home rule charter city back in 2010 by a vote of the people. And every once in a while we get an opportunity to review that charter, review this document, our constitution, if you will, and recommend amendments, just like you might do, the federal government might do amendments to the U.S. Constitution, right? And so not something we do every day, but something where we have that process in place so that we can do that on an as-needed basis. And so this is actually the second home rule charter review process that the city has been through. So during the course of 2022, we convened a panel of 9 Nixa residents, 3 from each district. Among those folks, they elected their leader to be Mr. Hartsock here, to be the chair. Andrew Carl served as the co-chair for that. You guys met for a lot of hours. You guys met a lot of times over the better part of 2022 and really read over this document with a fine-tooth comb to look for anything you guys wanted to adjust. Talk a little bit about that process, what that looked like for you guys.
Yes, we did. In fact, you mentioned, so we became a home rule charter city on election ballot of 2010. That was when we actually decided to add this document into Nixa and not just follow the state of Missouri's constitution, which again, is just an absolute great thing. It gives more power to the people in Nixa. It gives more of a voice. Based on constitutional rule, this is a limiting document. So one of the things, it limits what the government can do. At the same time, it also sets forth rules that the government should follow. As Drew said, there was a review back in 2019 because our charter actually stipulates that there must be a review at least every 10 years. So in 2019, there was a review. Some of you may remember voting on that, a few of those topics. Those topics were really more based on communication. If you look back and look at some of those things, there were some topics related to how to notify the public of topics. And so the electronic medium was something that needed to be added. There's many methods that are still used, but we wanted to make sure that there was the ability to do more. So we didn't have to do another review until potentially 2029. However, there were some topics that came up in the last 2 to 3 years that required some immediate attention. And so we did meet. Our first meeting was back at the first quarter of 2022. And we saw that there was a lot of work to do. We didn't want to take anything for granted. Again, 9 commissioners total, 3 from each district, 3 districts in Nixa. The attendance was amazing. The opinions were very diverse, hearing many walks of life come to those meetings and be very passionate about what the Constitution says for our city and how things might need to be updated. We went through every single phrase with a fine tooth comb, and we covered every single article, both in private sessions as well as in public sessions that were open for people to come and speak to and address. And as we went through that, we were able to determine really three major things that needed to be looked at, Drew.
Yeah, and so in summary, the three main things that we talked about were that you guys ended up bringing forth as recommendations for updates are one, clarifying that council can remove any elected official in the case of misconduct, not just a council member, but even up to and including the mayor or a judge or any elected official. The second one was really about making it possible to bring the municipal court back to Nixa. And we can talk a little bit, we'll talk more about that and explain that issue here coming up. And then the third one is really about requiring more signatures on a petition in order to start that recall process for an elected official. And we'll kind of dive into each one of those. We'll ask you questions about those. And this is a good time for us to remind folks that we had opened up. Folks could have submitted questions ahead of time. And so we have a few questions that were submitted ahead of time. And you can also still submit a question now during the live stream here on Facebook. Just type your question into the comments on the stream, and we'll be trying to get to some of those. And if we don't get to your question during this live stream today, just stay tuned. We'll be trying to answer some of those in the comments later. Or if we don't cover your topic today, feel free to send an email to cityhall@nixa.com, and we will try to answer those. We'll prioritize answering those email questions as well. And if you want to just read more about this, you can go to nixa.com/elections, and there's information about all the things that Nixa voters are going to be deciding on related to municipal government on April 4th, right there. And there's a button there you can, that's a prompt about the home rule charter updates that have been proposed. You can click on that. There's a whole page that explains all of this. You can see the actual language that's on the ballot. You can read explanations of those things. And then you can read, there's even a link there to the actual ordinance that would be adopted by that action. And so you can kind of really read all the fine tooth, all the details are right there available on nixa.com. So with that, why don't we kind of start by explaining a little bit about Prop 1. Yeah. And let's kind of maybe see if we can throw that language on the screen of what that question is going to look like on the ballot, and kind of talk through what this means for folks. So it says, shall section 3.7 of the Nixa City Charter be amended as set forth in ordinance number 2285? And again, that's the ordinance that's available on the website. Basically, that's just the ordinance that calls for this particular election, to grant the city council the power to remove elected officers from office when the officer has been charged with conduct constituting the grounds of forfeiture of office. So Mark, give us a little bit of background on what the discussion was there, why you guys as a commission came up with this as a recommended update.
Absolutely. Yes, and so as we talked about, there were several different things that we talked about, some that required, or we felt like required potential voter language to be written so that the public could make a final choice. Most of those things, as we worked through the details, worked with legal, looked at other examples of other charters and what our state constitution does, we were able to determine that they were sufficient or they met the needs currently. So we touched on a little bit again, kind of what this process was. We met every 2 weeks for the majority of the year, up until just the middle of the summer. We put a little bit of a break there for a few. We met monthly to allow a few to take some vacations. But this particular portion of it, when we talked about why this might need to be updated, it's no secret that we went through a recent recall election, and it created a lot of jaded opinions in our community. Some that we should never have to get that far to remove somebody that maybe they felt like needed to be out of office. And the other side of it was that maybe it shouldn't be so easy for a recall to happen. So those types of topics were brought forward, and we felt like Proposition 1 was something that could help address issues with the public's perception of our elected officials, as well as just making it fair across the board. So if you take the time to actually review through that, one of the questions that is asked is shall section 3.7 of the Nixa City Charter be amended as set forth in this ordinance to grant the city of the council the power to remove elected officers? So that's an important thing. If you look at our charter now and you look at Article 3, sections 3.5 through sections 3.10 address this and talk about all the different processes that can lead to forfeiture or potential removal from office. Those already exist for our council members. They're already in place for our council members. They have been since 2010. It's a widely accepted practice, and everybody is pretty happy with that process. But it was brought to our attention that this did not apply equally across the board. So for example, when we had municipal court in Nixa, this would not have applied to our elected judge. We have a mayor in Nixa, and this does not apply to the mayor. So adding this extra language adds an extra layer of protection to the people so that our elected representatives have the ability to question situations that may result in a forfeiture or removal from office, to answer your question.
It's really just about clarifying that, hey, this is meant to apply to a mayor, a judge, any elected official, not just council members. It's not really changing that process. It's just about clarifying, hey, it also applies to these people.
That's exactly correct. No change in process whatsoever. An adopted process we've already had in place again since 2010. So in our 13th year now, it's really just making sure that all elected officials in a government position in the city level here in Nixa can be impacted by this.
And we have a question about this one here about charges in relationship to Prop 1, and as far as would it make it so that, or is the current process that someone can be removed from elected office just because there's an allegation, or do they have to be charged with a crime? Do they have to be found guilty of a crime?
Exactly.
At what point can they actually be removed?
Yeah, great. And that was we had that question from a few of our constituents in Nixa, and did a little bit of research on this. And I think that's, as with many documents, if you take one section of it and look at that one little piece under a microscope, it doesn't make complete sense. So especially when you start talking about constitutional documents in our home rule charter, there's a lot that goes into that. So if you just take section 3.6 or just take section 3.7 and you talk about that somebody can be removed based on charges, that gets a little bit confusing, and it starts to sound like, okay, maybe we could potentially remove somebody that's innocent. We completely understand that. So if you look at section 3.5 all the way through section 3.10, you see the process that's required there. And it is worth noting to keep in mind that anyone that is actually convicted of any criminal offense or crime can be automatically removed. So that really already applies and exists. We're talking about the situation where things like moral turpitude and other aspects of maybe not fulfilling their office expectations come to play. So again, if we start talking about things like that recent recall election, it was a hotly contested topic depending on which side you were on. So when we talk about adding this dynamic, we're adding the dynamic to give, again, the people the power. So, and keep in mind, when we're saying that the council has the ability to do that, we are a council-governed city. So if you look at other similar municipalities, some have different levels of power for different elected officials. Our council is our representation for our city and the people that we elect. So we want to make sure that our council has the power to remove somebody they feel like is not meeting the needs of their office, regardless of what that reason could potentially be.
And there's a question here about what conduct constitutes forfeiture of office, and how is that defined, or who determines that? Is that just up to council? Is there some legal standard that has to be met?
Yes, there absolutely is a legal standard for it. In fact, if we want to take a moment to look at this, and they gave me some time here to talk, so we're going to take it. If we want to take a moment and look at sections 3.6, it talks about vacancy, forfeiture of office, and filling vacancies, as well as section 3.7 talks about the judge of qualifications. So let's talk for a moment about this, because there are investigations and independent audits. Things can go to court if there's a question over this. Interference with administration comes back in 3.5. But let's take just a moment here to look at this and say kind of what we're looking at. So if you look at Article 3, section 3.6, subsection B, forfeiture of office, council members shall forfeit office if at any time during the member's term of office the member lacks any qualification of the office prescribed by this charter or by law, or 2, if any member violates any prohibition of this charter or is convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude, or section 3, if the member defaults in taxes to the city or fails to attend 3 consecutive regular meetings of the council without being excused by the council, And then we also talk about filling vacancies in other situations like that. So there's many things that can happen. If you jump down even to like section 3.8, there's some examples here about like the city clerk, council proceedings, and how things work through this. All of these phrases and terms really come back and apply to Article 3 as a whole. And these are all things that could be taken into account when considering the potential removal or forfeiture of an office.
But again, it's important to remember that the only thing that would be impacted by if folks choose to vote Prop 1, and we should clarify a couple of things really quick here. One is the Home Rule Charter is available on our website. If you would like to read through that, you can read through the entire document. It's available on Nixa.com. And there's a section there at the top that says Our Government. If you click on that, there's a button about Home Rule Charter. You click on that, and you can go right to the whole PDF, and you can read through the entire charter as it exists today, if you would like to. And another thing is that this whole stream, the purpose of this is to explain to you what happens if you vote yes and what happens if you vote no. And we're not asking during this live stream for folks to vote one way or another. We just want to make sure you're educated and informed so you can make your own decision on how you think things should work and whether or not we should adopt the proposed updates that have come across here. But again, yeah. So if folks vote yes on Prop 1, the only thing that would be changing is changing that word to make sure that this process applies not only to council but also to mayor, judge, any elected official.
That's right.
And that's the only thing that's really on the ballot there. And if folks vote no on that, then it'll continue to be a little unclear about whether it applies to the mayor or judge. It'll be, but it would continue to apply as it exists to the council members.
That's right. Yeah, I had this question addressed to me similarly in person not long ago, and a very good layman's way of thinking about Proposition 1. Another way of wording this question could be, do you feel like all elected officials in the city of Nixa should be held to the same standard as our city council? And if the answer to that is yes, please vote yes on that. If you feel that the mayor or any other elected officials should be held to a different standard than council, then please vote no.
Fair enough. So I think we've talked about Prop 1 pretty well. Macy, if we haven't gotten any questions about Prop 1 at this point. No questions yet. Okay. So we can always circle back to these things if you think of something. But we're going to go ahead and roll on to Prop 2 and try to explain that a little bit. So Macy, let's throw the language up for Prop 2 as far as what people are going to see when they go to the polls next Tuesday. So they're going to see shall Article 6 and Section 15.2 of the Nixa City Charter be amended as set forth in Ordinance Number 2285 to modify said provisions to account for changes to Missouri law regarding municipal courts by 1. Modifying Article 6 to authorize this council to establish a municipal court or elect to have ordinance violations heard by a circuit judge. 2. Require the council to review the decision to have a circuit judge hear ordinance violations every 4 years. 3. Authorize the position of an elected chief municipal judge who shall be the presiding judge of the municipal court. 4. Allow for the council to establish elected associate judges. 5. Include incapacitation as grounds for vacancy in the office of municipal judge. 6. Authorize the council to appoint substitute judges to act in the absence or conflict of interest in a municipal judge. 7. Provide an applicability clause for Section 6.2 of the Charter. 8. Remove Section 6.3 in its entirety. And 9. Remove Section 15.2D in its entirety. Whew, that's a mouthful. So as you can tell, we're in the nerdy side of nitty-gritty part of how democracy works at the local level.
Very fair.
We're in the details here. So a rough translation of that, Mark, I was sat in on all these meetings. So I listened to all the hours and hours and hours of discussion on this stuff. So I know where you guys are coming from. So the basic translation of this is that it's we lost the ability to have our municipal court here at Nixa City Hall, basically, because the state changed the way they were doing things. It kind of forced the city in a position where we had to kind of relinquish our court and send that over to the circuit court which is located in Ozark. So it's managed by the county court house. And our municipal judge no longer really has a job to do there because the judges of the county court are seeing our cases for when you get a ticket from Nixa Police on a municipal violation, or if you get a ticket from our code compliance officer, for example, for tall grass or something like that. These municipal violations are now being seen over in the county court, whereas we used to manage those here at Nixa City Hall. And so it just put us in a position where we weren't able to continue to manage the municipal court, but our charter, as currently is written, says that we shall have a municipal court. And so it kind of puts us in a tricky position where the state has kind of superseded our home rule charter, and our home rule charter doesn't have any language about us being able to establish or to bring back a municipal court at any point. And so we're in this position where even if conditions were to change at the state level or the county level, or something was to change that formula, and we were able to bring municipal court back, currently the home rule charter doesn't really say anything about us being able to do that. So you guys recommended some language about the idea was, let's make sure the home rule charter allows us that possibility of, if and when we want to, we could bring municipal court back here, right?
That's exactly right. So, I talked a little bit in my introduction how a home rule charter works and how it basically has the ability to limit the power to the government. The state constitution has the power to limit what we can do as well. So at any point in time, if the state constitution has a requirement that is stricter, for example, than what our home rule charter states, there might be a situation where we have to bring some change in verbiage to the public to vote on. And again, I am 100% volunteer based on this. I don't really have an official office to hold. I'm volunteering my time as well. All of our commissioners that came to put this time in. So we are here speaking on behalf of the people, the public, and the both that as well as how it pertains to the city. And so when you talk about Proposition 2, this is a tough one for us because we had a very successful municipal court. In fact, many people were not happy about the fact that it had to become a county court-based situation. As Drew stated, our home rule charter says we shall have one, which means we have one. We can't operate it, even though we still technically currently have a judge. So it's kind of a tough situation, and it's something that has to be fixed. By ordinance, it was moved to the county. And without diving into this too much, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not legal, but again, involved in every single one of these meetings. State constitution had requirements that we were not going to be able to meet in our municipality based on the way we wanted to run a court system. So it just made the most sense to kind of concede and let that become a county-based court system for now. That being said, we love Nixa and we loved our court system, so we want to be able to bring it back if ever need to be. So this proposition suggests how that would look. It requires a review of that, a minimum of at least every 4 years. So similar to the minimum review for the charter every 10 years, we want to make sure that if the city believes that that we are ready for municipal court again, that at least every 4 years we're going to review that, consider it, look and see what it would take. And it also just brings us in line with state constitution. So a yes vote on Prop 2 ensures that the city of Nixa's home rule charter is in complete compliance with the state constitution, and that we're following basically the rules that we are following today with county court, as well as leaving that complete article available to be able to come right back online as our city continues to grow, and the real possibility that we could bring municipal court back to Nixa in the future.
Yeah. And let's go ahead and move on to Prop 3. Let's see the language there on what folks are going to be able to see. Shall Section 10.3 of the Nixa City Charter be amended as set forth in Ordinance Number 2285 to modify Section 10.3A.3, subsection 3, to require recall petitions to receive signatures from 10% of qualified voters registered to vote in the last election for such office, instead of 10% of total votes cast in the last election for such office, and remove unconstitutional language in Section 10.3C regarding the voting and residency status of circulators. So this is probably the only one that was a little bit contentious. The first two, Prop 1 and Prop 2, were added on to as recommendations from the Home Rule Charter Commission with unanimous votes. But on this one, there was one dissenting vote that was not sure that they were not supportive of this language, but the other 8 members of the commission voted in support of this recommendation. And so that the majority kind of got the way as far as advancing the recommendation forward to voters. And that this decision is up to voters.
That's right.
Yeah, so maybe explain a little bit of the thought process, what the debate was on this issue,
Absolutely.
kind of what some of the contentious parts were, and what the discussion was, and why those 8 decided to bring this forward as a recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a hot topic. You know, Nixa made national news, really global news. If you look back to that first recall election that we had to go through, many people felt like it was a perfect example of what needed to happen in our city. The reality is based on what our home rule charter said at the time, it absolutely needed to happen. It required a certain amount of votes cast to qualify for, a certain number of petition signatures to line up with the number of votes cast for a specific office to basically force the city into a recall election mode. So everything that was required was met, and it was a valid recall election. Obviously, it was a landslide failure in the direction of a recall. That recall did not occur, and it actually showed that Nixa has the ability to come out and voice their opinion in record numbers when there's a hotly contested topic, such as that situation. If you're not familiar with it, I don't want to go into the politics of why that happened or who it involved. I'm sure it's easily available to research on your own. But the topic isn't as much about why that happened as much as how it should or could potentially need to happen in the future. The topics that continued to come towards us really quite often was one of two things. It should still be very easy to have a recall in the city of Nixa if voters feel that it's necessary. That was the first thing. The words very easy are subjective. And if you take a moment to look at state constitution, and again, we talk about how the home rule charter for the city of Nixa works compared to state constitution. State constitution requires 25% of all registered voters to basically be a part of that petition before it can be considered a valid recall campaign or election. The city of Nixa didn't have that strict of a requirement. In fact, if we look at the requirement that it currently has today and has had since 2010, it's a 10% situation. And ironically, it's not 10% of the registered or qualified voters for the city, it's 10% of the votes cast for that specific office. So the example that brings up is a situation like a council person. If a council person runs for office and has 100 people vote for them, it would take 10 persons for that council person to potentially, for someone to apply for a petition to recall that council person. If there are 3,000 qualified voters in that district, this could potentially change that to require 300 people to sign that petition before a recall election could occur. So we had a lot of topics about this, and the question was, is just simply changing it from votes cast for a specific office to qualified voters or registered voters a significant enough change? So again, it's really important that we look at an entire document from start to finish when we compare things. So if we look at that section, by the way, this is going to be in Article 10 and it's subsection 10.6, and this talks about things like a referendum, recall, and withdrawals of petitions, things like that. There are a few different things: initiatives, referendum, and recalls. Apologize for that. And it's interesting, if you look at those three things that people can bring to force to election, the recall is the only one that is based on votes cast. Everything else had requirements for qualified voters. In fact, the initiative has 7%, the referendum has 10%, and the recall also has 10%, but instead of qualified voters, votes cast. So if you look at this from a review perspective, again, Home Rule Charter Commission review, that seems to be a little bit out of line. And especially when you look at the state of Missouri requiring 25%. 25% is a pretty huge number, and some would believe
Before you can recall a governor or something like that.
That's right. Before you can even get the opportunity to have that recall election. So it's important to remember that. We're talking about giving more power to the public here, and we already have more than twice the power regardless. So where that holdout was, you brought it out. And these were, I said before, we had a lot of different opinions. We had a lot of great voices. We had people that came to those public hearings to voice concerns. If there was concern, it wasn't about whether or not it needed to be a little bit more challenging to have a recall. It was really more about, should it be a higher percentage? And that was the topic that continued to come up. In fact, I think I'm going to speak fairly when I say I'm the chair. I'm trying to speak for everybody's voice that was involved. All the documentation that I have is that the one person that was not for changing this to 10% of qualified voters was in favor of raising that percentage significantly. I don't want to quote anybody specifically and say this is the percentage they wanted, but they were looking at possibly upping that to a percentage that was more in line with state constitution. However, still leaving it set to be of votes cast for that specific office instead of qualified voters. So where I have a little bit of an issue with this is the logic that where people say we still want to make it easy, we still want to make it attainable. Well, if let's say we do run that up to 25% of votes cast, the issue we have with that is that when you're trying to recall somebody, isn't it likely that that person might have had a bit of a contested election? They could potentially have a hotly debated topic. And if that is the case and someone is running against them, there will likely be a large amount of votes there. So while we're saying we want it to be attainable, if we go in line with the state constitution, but leave the terminology votes cast, and it is 25%, it could potentially require 25% of a very large number. If we keep the 10% rule in place, but we now make it 10% of qualified voters, it is still very attainable, much more attainable than it is in a non-home rule charter city. So I know I'm talking on a lot here.
And there's some other cities that have set, like the state has,
Yes.
to 25% of registered voters. But you guys, the commission decided to vote in favor of 10% of registered voters, not 25%, like some of the other surrounding communities have.
That's correct. And like I said, I know I'm going on and on here, but this is a hugely important topic for our community. 10% of qualified voters is significantly lower than many, many, many other municipalities. In fact, it is the lowest in the state of Missouri. Nobody has anything lower than us if this does pass. So why is that still so important? And let's not sugarcoat it, right? It does potentially make it more difficult. If you have only 1,000 people show up to vote for that office, at 10% of votes cast, it only takes 100 people to sign a petition and require the city of Nixa to run a recall election.
And that last recall election that was an off-cycle thing, it cost the city about $16,000 to put that extra election on the ballot. And in that election, you're not actually deciding who will be mayor.
That's right.
Or who will sit on council in that seat. What you're deciding is, shall this person remain in their seat? If then the community decides not to hold that person in their seat, then a second election has to be held to fill that seat.
That's right.
And in the meantime, the city there are mechanisms as defined by the home rule charter as far as how the council can fill that seat in the meantime until the election be held. But it's not like it's all done after that election that's been brought after a single election is brought by the petition for recall, right?
That's right. And it's important that we're only talking about the petition for recall. We're not actually talking about the removal of the person from office. So this percentage change does not make it easier to recall a person. It makes it easier to get the petition granted to force the city to have the election. And that's an important aspect of this, right? So if you look at the one recall example we have in the city of Nixa, again, it was an absolute landslide loss towards the recall, meaning that person stayed in office. The majority of Nixa voters felt like that recall did not need to occur and that person should stay in office. So what does changing this from votes cast to qualified voters do? Okay, if we talk about the actual terms and what that changing that one phrase in there from votes cast to qualified voters, we're still making 10%. We're still saying that that's an attainable figure. In my opinion, and in 8 of the 9 commissioners' opinion, we felt like that was still an attainable situation. Our concern is that 10% of votes cast is too easy and also a variable that cannot be possibly controlled. Perfect example of that is somebody running uncontested and people not completely understanding how voting systems work. And maybe they think they don't need to vote for somebody that they strongly support, but hey, nobody's running against them, so maybe I don't need to vote for them. That results in a very low voter turnout for a specific office,
Yeah.
which allows for a petition to potentially recall that office more than attainable. Now we're talking about a city of about 25,000 here and living within municipal city limits. And we're talking about qualified voters somewhere in the neighborhood of around 14,000. I don't know who in our community thinks that if we have somewhere around 700 people vote for an office that's uncontested, believes that 70 people signing a petition for a recall is a good representation of 14,000 qualified voters. I, for one, do not feel like that's a fair representation. And if it's a hotly contested topic, there will likely be many people come out to vote against that recall. Let's be honest, if we're going to have a recall election in our city, we want a fair number of qualified voters to agree with that petition. We want a fair number of qualified voters to say, this person needs to be out of office. We don't want to have frivolous campaigns, and we don't want to waste taxpayers' dollars. We want to have a voice, and we want it to be attainable, but we want to make sure that it's a valid reason to have someone recalled. And we believe that 10% of qualified voters having to agree with that statement is the right solution for the city of Nixa.
And that's just to get the ball rolling on the process. It's still going to take 50% plus one to actually remove somebody from office. It's
That's
still
100% correct.
Still requires half plus one of a simple majority to remove somebody from office at the time of election. We're just talking about the number of signatures required on the petition to get that ball rolling to have that election.
That's right. And again, I'm not saying that there's not a valid reason for a recall to occur. And we are saying that it should still be easier than what the state of Missouri states by our home rule charter by a significant percentage, 10% versus 25%. And we're also saying that we believe that if you can get 10% to back your petition for recall, you now have a legitimate, solid chance of your recall going through. Otherwise, why are we doing this? Otherwise, why are we dragging our city through the mud? Why are we putting this information out there and making people maybe go through some undue stress that's not necessary? Again, if a recall is necessary, let's give enough of a voice to the public that can occur.
We had a question here from Ron Sanders who asked on Facebook about explaining why the recall standards should be higher than the number of votes that candidates might receive. I think we've addressed that to some degree, but is there anything else you would like to add on that?
So more than what a candidate could, yeah. So the difference between the 10% of votes cast versus the qualified. Yeah, I mean, hopefully I addressed it, but in my opinion, again, speaking on behalf of the majority of our commissioners, 8 versus 9 again on that, our opinion is that why would the number be higher? Because getting a petition to recall a person really has nothing to do with how many votes that person may have received if everybody had voted, right? So just because you didn't show up to vote for an election where somebody ran uncontested, doesn't mean you shouldn't have a voice in whether or not they should be removed. In fact, it's almost exactly the opposite of that. Unfortunately, the world just doesn't have a huge high voter turnout on regular occasions. That number tends to go up as you have more contested topics. So if you have people running against each other and it's a hotly contested election, those numbers are going to go up a lot. And if you have somebody that won that a year and a half later, I believe was the minimum requirement, somewhere around 18 months later into office, the majority of people now feel like that individual's just not qualified for that position. It's not always about again, keep in mind, recalls aren't always about moral turpitude. They aren't always about a crime. They aren't always about a conviction or even charges. A recall can really just be that you feel that person isn't fulfilling their duties in office. So that should not be something really easy to do. It should be attainable, but it should not be overly easy. So we're talking about someone has already gained office. They've already won the election, right? We're talking about keeping it fair and square here. So getting them recalled, removing them, this should not be a frivolous attempt. It should come with real merit. And we believe that 10% of qualified voters gives a real voice to that and brings real merit to the potential for that recall being successful.
And should just clarify, you're speaking from the perspective of a resident, a volunteer,
Yeah, that's right.
Not a city employee, not an elected official, but somebody who volunteered your time on the commission, trying to speak on behalf of the commission. I'm in the position of, as a city employee, trying to just make sure that folks are informed about the facts and can make their decision on how we want to make sure you're informed, understand what's been proposed here, so you can make an informed decision. And we'll see if we have any other questions that have come in, but otherwise I think we've covered everything, Mark.
Yeah.
And
I would like to touch on that briefly because,
is there something you'd like to explain a little bit?
Drew makes a perfect point here on that. Is again, I'm not a city official. None of our commissioners are city officials. We're volunteers putting in time to represent the voices of our districts. Again, I was elected to be the chairman, so again, kind of running those meetings, the speaker for the meeting. That's why I'm here answering questions on behalf of everyone today. And I hope that I'm addressing those questions as well as I can, as well as also sharing our position. But it's a great example to make is I'm not speaking on behalf of the position of the city. I'm not even speaking for the city. In fact, I'm here speaking for you, the people of Nixa, as a citizen of Nixa, and thinking about both our kids in this community for what we want for the future. The next mandatory review for this is roughly 10 years away. Again, if there's a major topic come up, something can be requested. In fact, even our home rule charter says that if enough citizens of Nixa want to have a review, it will happen sooner, which is exactly why this one has happened now and it's happening sooner. So yeah, I don't want anybody to think that I'm here as a paid city official or office. This is all volunteer based, and we're here speaking on behalf of the city. So, and my opinions and the commissioner's opinions may differ from the city's. But the thing that was great about this process is as we worked through this and we ran these proposed amendments through legal, we had to come forth in front of the city council and present these potential amendments. And city council then also had to review these in depth and vote to bring these to ballot for the public to ultimately decide on. So our process is working exactly as it's supposed to. The majority of the commissioners have agreed that these three propositions make sense for our commission. Our presentation to the city council of Nixa agreed that these need to be brought to ballot. And now these three propositions are in the hands of the city and the public to decide on.
So you'll be voting on April 4th again on these three propositions, and we encourage you to remember to turn out to vote April 4th. And if we have any other questions, please send those via email to cityhall@nixa.com. Add them in the comments below this video on Facebook. You're actually not able to leave comments on YouTube, but you can watch this stream there on YouTube as well. It'll remain there as a record if you'd like to reference it before going to the ballot and making your decision. We hope this has been helpful to you, informing you, so you feel like you can make an educated decision when you go vote. And thank you for voting and for being an informed voter. And we'll see you guys next time.